My fellow Nigerians, as your future president, today I want to address the recent diplomatic incident involving South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and United States President Donald Trump during Ramaphosa's May 21, 2025 United States visit. Yes, Nigeria has many issues, and we must absolutely remain laser focused on finding solutions to them, as I've advocated in some of my recent speeches. But today's commentary on South Africa is in the context of the African Peer Review Mechanism, APRM, an African Union initiative through which member states can assess each other's governance and development progress. In terms of specifics, I'll talk about the causes of the Trump-Ramaphosa clash, the main issues raised by Trump, as well as the implications for South Africa and the wider world, and I will conclude by highlighting lessons that Nigeria can learn from the incident. But let me start by reacting to an opinion piece I read written by Ghanaian President John Mahama. In the piece titled, "Trump's Unfounded Attack on Cyril Ramaphosa Was an Insult to All Africans," Mahama essentially wrote that South Africa can't or shouldn't be accused of racial injustices and or related bad governance issues today because of its history of racial persecution of blacks during colonialism and apartheid. First off, Mahama, next time you write such an article, don't claim to speak for all Africans. You don't speak for millions of Africans, and you certainly don't speak for me. Second, as most honest Africans know, we often don't tell ourselves certain harsh truths. And Mahama certainly mostly didn't tell the truth in his piece. In one notoriously pathetic line, Mahama wrote, and I quote, "Ramaphosa was blindsided by Trump with those unfounded accusations." End quote. Really? That white farmers are being attacked and murdered, even as part of a larger crime problem in South Africa, is an unfounded accusation? By the way, what about the xenophobic attacks by black South Africans against other Africans in South Africa, especially Nigerians and Zimbabweans? Anyway, that's a discussion for another day. But Mahama went on, and I quote, "Trump refused to listen as Ramaphosa insisted that his government didn't have any official policies of discrimination." End quote. Now, if expropriating land without compensation, largely on a racial basis, and then favoring one racial group over another, using racial quota laws like BEE, Black Economic Empowerment, isn't discrimination, then I don't know what discrimination is. Mahama's conclusion was even more pathetic. Hear him, I quote, "Real refugees are being turned away from the borders of the wealthiest nations, and real babies will die because international aid has been abruptly stopped." End quote. Is Mahama making excuses in advance for his own job creation and healthcare failures? It's a fact that most of the so-called refugees are actually economic migrants, especially from places like Mahama's Ghana and other African countries and other developing countries, fleeing the lack of jobs caused by bad governance and corruption. Also, it's such a shame that in 2025, that's more than 60 years after most African countries, including Ghana, became independent, Mahama is blaming infant mortality in Africa on foreign aid cuts. Africa doesn't need foreign aid. That's the fact. Let's tell ourselves that fact. Let's be honest to ourselves. Our politicians should utilize our wealth to prioritize our people's interests instead of corruptly enriching themselves and their Western educated families and then expecting to constantly receive foreign aid. Prominent American geopolitical analyst Victor Davis Hanson, in a recent segment, brilliantly summarized the backstory of the Trump-Ramaphosa meeting when he said, and I quote, "Ramaphosa requested a meeting with Trump because he had a free trade agreement with the US with no tariffs on South African agriculture, metals, and so on. And Ramaphosa, was running a $9 billion trade surplus. In addition, he was getting $500 million in foreign aid from the United States." End quote. Hansen went on, and I quote, "Ramaphosa's ambassador to the US, Ibrahim Rasool, had just been expelled by the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio because he made a video and said Trump was a white supremacist. The ambassador had a hero's welcome when he went back. This is not the South Africa which such promised 30 years ago. This is a racialist state We had the video about the leader of the third largest party in South Africa, Julius Malema, saying that they wanted to kill the Boer, meaning whites, kill the farmer, to a big crowd. And in 2022, the South African Equality Court declared that the kill the Boer, kill the farmer chant is not hate speech. I don't know what hate speech is in South Africa if it is not kill a designated minority. So Trump got sick of it and said, I don't think you like us because you think I am a white supremacist. So I'm not going to give you $500 million in foreign aid. So we're not going to give you free trade into our markets, end quote. Now, all that's true except for the last part, the trade part. As I explained in a recent speech about Trump's tariffs, he's using them basically as tools to get fair trade deals for the United States. He's certainly not doing it to South Africa because they called him a racist. And let's just dispel the claim that President Trump is a racist or a white supremacist. He isn't. That's nothing but a politically motivated claim pushed by the Democrats in the United States as a slogan against Trump. Trump's record as a public figure long before he got into politics clearly shows that he isn't a racist. For example, there are videos online of Jesse Jackson, a prominent African-American activist and former Democrat presidential candidate, praising Trump in the 1990s for his contributions to black empowerment. Is it about Trump's cabinet? Well, thanks to the victim mentality that Democrats have successfully entrapped many African Americans in, there are very few blacks in Trump's Republican Party, and U.S. presidents, including Trump, always appoint their cabinet members from within their parties. In fact, support for Trump among blacks in the U.S. only went up in the 2024 election thanks to Trump's black empowerment policies in his first term. For example, he introduced opportunity zones to boost investment in black communities. In 2019, he championed and signed into law a bill permanently providing $255 million to historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs. Last month, he authorized more than $100 million for scholarships and research at HBCUs. He also freed many blacks who were excessively jailed under laws pushed by Democrats like Joe Biden and Bill Clinton. In February, Trump appointed one of such people, a black lady named Alice Johnson, the first ever pardon czar, giving her the power to recommend people to be pardoned by him. Let's get back to the Trump-Ramaphosa meeting. Trump showed Ramaphosa video evidence of Julius Malema and other South African opposition politicians and MPs, members of parliament, addressing crowds and chanting, quote, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, while the crowds responded with shoot to kill. Ramaphosa responded, I quote, what you saw isn't government policy. We have a multi-party democracy that allows people to express themselves, end of quote. To that, Trump replied, I quote, you do allow them to take land, and when they take the land, they kill the white farmer. And when they kill the white farmer, nothing happens to them, end quote. Now, yes, the image Trump referenced as evidence of killed and buried white farmers in South Africa was actually of an incident in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That was a very big mistake on Trump's part, although the article was also about South Africa. Now, getting such details wrong weakened Trump's position given the stakes involved, but that doesn't mean his position is wrong. White farmers have indeed been murdered in South Africa, including as a result of the Kill the Boer chant. For example, people testified on their oath about that at the Post-Apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the 1990s. At the Trump meeting, South Africa's Agriculture Minister, John Steenhuisen, a white and a member of the opposition Democratic Alliance, which formed a unity government with the ANC after the 2024 elections, said, and I quote, we have a rural safety problem, end quote. He also said the Democratic Alliance entered into an alliance with the ANC to keep the radical EFF, that's Malema's party, and MK parties led by Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma out of power. Particularly Julius Malema, and we'll get to that in a moment. You see, Malema has been quite open in the past about his support for a revolution in South Africa that could effectively result in the mass killing of whites. In a 2018 TRT World interview, for example, he said, and I quote, we've not called for the killing of white people, at least for now, end quote. Let me say that again. we've not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. When the journalist said, and I quote, "You'd understand somebody watching that, they'll freak out. It sounds like a genocidal call," end quote. Malema responded, I quote, cry babies," end quote. Now, if that, when combined with the kill the boer, kill the farmer chant, often used by Malema at his rallies, isn't insightful, if that isn't inciting violence, then I don't know what inciting violence is. If Malema was white and he said that about blacks, the uproar and the outrage all over the world, including, of course, in Africa, will be out of this world. By the way, when Trump asked Ramaphosa if he condemns Malema and the EFF, Ramaphosa replied, and I quote, "Oh yes, we always have," end quote. But Ramaphosa is also on a video saying, I quote, "Would love to have Malema back in the ANC. He's ANC deep down in his heart. The ANC is their home," end quote. I loathe Malema. I really don't like the guy. Not only is he very corrupt, but he was expelled as ANC youth leader for being extremely controversial. Indeed, he's actually been found guilty before of inciting violence and hate speech by the South African Human Rights Commission. Ironically, the people who have often condemned the United States, especially then President Bill Clinton, for not doing enough to prevent the Rwandan genocide, are the same ones condemning President Trump for trying to prevent South Africa from sliding down that very dangerous path. Yes, Trump's pressure on Ramaphosa was probably to give the US an upper hand during trade negotiations, but that's the nature of modern international relations, and African leaders must up their game. America needs South Africa's rare earth minerals for industrial production, but likewise, South Africa needs American investment and market access. Also, South Africa is hosting the G20 in November and wants Trump's presence, as the US will be the next G20 host. Ramaphosa posted on X on May 27 saying, and I quote, "Our visit to the US was focused on resetting the relationship, recalibrating the tariff regime, attracting investment, and securing US participation in the G20 South Africa," end quote. But the former African Union ambassador to the United States, Dr. Arekana Chihombori Kwal, criticized Ramaphosa's team for lack of preparedness. She said African presidents need to wake up to the new way of diplomacy and strategy. Ultimately, nations must balance economic necessities against human rights concerns and find diplomatic ways to address issues raised. It doesn't help Ramaphosa's case that he says, or he has said, the "kill the boer or kill the farmer" chant is just a liberation chant and not a call to violence or murder, and that South Africa allows such chants because of free speech, free expression. How can anyone argue that that slogan or that chant is not an incitement of violence or hate speech? The South African government has never publicly condemned the chant. Well, they did sort of, in the US, only after Trump put them in a very tight corner. But of course, the chant is literally a threat and an incitement to kill. In fact, Ramaphosa's argument falls flat on the facts. The ANC's paramilitary wing, the MK, learned the song, it seems, in the 1970s from the Zimbabwe People's Revolutionary Army, ZIPRA, which had a policy of killing the Boers, that's whites. In the 1980s, MK had a strategy of attacking white farmers seen as economic symbols of apartheid. In the 1990s, farm attacks predominantly against whites, both during and after the transition from apartheid, became very common, resulting in robberies and hundreds of injuries and murders. And yes, the problem has persisted till today. An August 2023 statement on the website of the Democratic Alliance, the main opposition party, which, as I mentioned earlier, is now in a unity government with Ramaphosa's ANC, shows that they were, I quote, "deeply concerned about the sharp rise in farm murders in South Africa and the dangerous rhetoric inciting violence against a particular group in society," end quote. They also condemned, I quote, "the ANC's failure to address the inflammatory statements and farm attacks," end quote, and called for a commission of inquiry to, I quote, "investigate the link between incitement and farm attacks," end quote. Yes, there is no white genocide in South Africa. Trump was absolutely wrong about that. But farm attacks and murders are real, and they, like other forms of crime, need to be dealt with decisively. And by the way, even without white genocide, Ramaphosa had no sympathy for the white deaths Trump referenced. He could have argued that although such incidents happen, they are not necessarily targeted. Instead, his one-sided political arguments will surely only further fuel South Africa's racial tensions. It is this glaring lack of effective leadership by the ANC that has resulted in them steadily losing support over the past 20 years. In the 2009 general elections, the ANC had 65.9% of the vote. In 2014, it was 62.1%. By 2019, it had dropped to 57.5%, and most recently in 2024, it dropped even further to 40.1%. As Trevor Zaba, a black South African activist, stated on X, I quote, Ramaphosa has been unaccountable for too long. Trump did South Africa and the world a favor by exposing the ANC and the EFF. Change is necessary. We're tired of kleptocratic narcissists ruining our beautiful country, end quote. Phumlani Majosi, a black South African political economist, agreed and said, I quote, for black South Africans, Trump is a plus. He's holding leaders who are destroying the lives of black South Africans accountable. Black unemployment is more than 40%. The government provides lousy public education to black South Africans. Millions of black people rely on social grants, and they are the most affected by violent crime. Trump says that our leaders must take responsibility. Good, end quote. Now, as black South Africans have argued, whites are settlers. That's true. But as Trevor Zaba said on X, Afrikaners are South Africans too. Racist ANC, EFF, MK politicians must forget about the they must go rhetoric. Afrikaners came, built, and stayed, and South Africa is better for it, end quote. That rhetoric is also unhelpful because white South Africans have said, if we look at Southern African history between 1000 and 1650, the Bantu-speaking ancestors of black South Africans migrated southward and are also settlers. And they are right, historically. That said, we are all aware of South Africa's terrible episode of apartheid, which only ended with the 1990 release of the great Nelson Mandela, who later became president in 1994 and made efforts towards racial harmony in South Africa. But the racial injustices of the past, no matter how severe, cannot be undone by a reverse wave of premeditated racial killings. That's why the great tech entrepreneur Elon Musk, himself a South African, said in an interview that, I quote, you should be questioning why there are racist laws in South Africa. That's the right thing to do, not to replace one set of racist laws with another set of racist laws, which is utterly wrong, end quote. Now, while South Africa's crime rates are significantly high, it's actually quite hard to find official data that is widely accepted by all the different racial groups because of narratives that get formed around those. But what's quite clear to many, including me, is that given the remote locations of most farms, which makes them hard to get to, and the fact that these farms are usually armed, farm attacks and murders are very likely premeditated. That's why golfer Retief Goosen's testimony on farm murders and burnings at the Trump meeting was quite touching. Also, Pastor Mark Burns, an African-American advisor to President Trump, recently visited South Africa and concluded after stakeholder consultations that there's indeed no white genocide, but that Trump's comments have led to demands for anti-crime solutions and conversations about reversing a program like BEE to make sure it benefits everyone, not just blacks. Indeed, as Trump pressures the ANC into hopefully changing course, black people will benefit the most. Why? Because violent crime, unemployment, corruption, and poverty affect black people the most. As Trevor Zaba said, I quote, resources are being stolen by the black middle class and black millionaires connected to the ANC. Black South Africans, your enemy is the ANC bourgeoisie that keeps resources, not white people, end quote. Now, the official unemployment rate amongst black people in South Africa stands at 37%. 64% of black people are said to live in poverty. Ramaphosa says all issues raised by Trump will be addressed in due time. You can tell that Ramaphosa is feeling Trump's pressure. As Phumlani Majosi stated, I quote, after meeting Trump, Ramaphosa has decided to relax BEE requirements for satellite services companies. Pressure breeds reform, end of quote. Also, Ramaphosa should introduce compensation provisions into South Africa's land expropriation law. You cannot punish today's generations of whites for the sins of their ancestors. It just doesn't make sense. It's not fair, basically. They are either South Africans or they are not. In fact, on this issue, it was reported a few days ago that the Federal Council of the Democratic Alliance, the leading opposition party, has adopted a motion to oppose land expropriation without compensation. DA Democratic Alliance Council Chairperson Helen Zille said the DA wants to secure private property rights. Ramaphosa signed the Expropriation Act on January 20, but the DA is confident that its efforts to fight for private property rights for all South Africans will prevail. As I earlier mentioned, South Africa absolutely needs investment for economic growth and job creation. According to a 2025 research by the South African Institute of Race Relations, when answering the question, I quote, "What are the two issues you think should be the top priorities for the government?" End quote. Unemployment and creating jobs came first at 28%, followed by illegal immigration and crime or safety and security at 7 and 6%, respectively. Consequently, it makes sense to scrap or at least amend unhelpful pro-black affirmative action programs like BEE to attract foreign investment and create jobs. You cannot be serious about attracting foreign investment, including Elon Musk's Starlink, for example, to boost fast internet connectivity and maintain counterproductive laws like BEE in place. Now, what can Nigeria learn from all this? One, we should elect leaders who won't discriminate against our citizens, be it on the basis of tribe, religion, and so on. Two, we need leaders who can negotiate win-win deals on behalf of our country. And by the way, if President Trump is indeed able to get South Africa to relax their BEE and other burdensome racial quota requirements for foreign investors, that will surely also be to the benefit of countries around the world, especially developing countries in Africa, Nigeria inclusive, that are looking to either enter or expand their investment presence in South Africa. Thank you for watching. May God bless the Republic of South Africa, and may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.